Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
So I came across this really interesting post.
Yes, it is.
I'm not connected with this person, but he's on LinkedIn as JTH, and someone liked it or reshared it that's in my network. So it came across my feed as I was scrolling across mindlessly, and I stopped on it because the first line is, I'm going to say something that might get me kicked out of the CISO club. And so I was like, oh, okay, let's see what you had to say, JT. And so this is the post, and I'll read most of it here.
Yeah, you might as well read it verbatim. It's short.
Yeah, he said, phishing simulations are mostly a waste of time. There, I said it. For the last decade, we've been doing the same thing, pat ourselves on the back for quote unquote raising awareness, assigning them 30 minutes of remedial training, send fake malicious email to staff, and catch the ones that click. But this approach is fundamentally broken because we are asking busy, stressed employees to spot forgeries that are becoming indistinguishable from reality. With generative AI, phishing emails now have perfect context, tone, and timing, and expecting your accountant to outsmart a state-sponsored cybercriminal is setting them up for failure. The future isn't better training, and I think we've already hit the ceiling with how good training can get. Assume the click will happen and ensure that it leads to a dead end. Stop shaming users for being human. If your security posture collapses because one person clicked a link, I'd argue the problem is architecture. Agree or disagree? And so I thought, wow, that's a hot take if I've ever seen one.
That is a spicy take. I like it though.
Yeah, like it did make me think about it because we've talked about how there's sometimes an attitude, especially like when security started first becoming a thing, of like almost looking at internal users as like, let's try to catch them, like almost getting gleeful that we're that as security professionals we're catching people inside, like got them right, and then like forcing them to do the training.
Fake bonuses during COVID.
Yeah.
Just really awful stuff. Fake,
So there's a bunch of different ways that people have been kind of almost malicious about how they conduct their program and being punitive about it rather than educating.
I know organizations that I worked with that were gleefully punitive, to where if you got caught, you had to write an apology letter to the entire company, and it was potentially a one strike and you're out.
Yeah.
They reserved the right to do that and had been known to terminate people for one failure. And this is a major publicly traded company, multinational conglomerate.
Yeah, and like to his point, the clicks are good. If you've ever run a phishing simulation program, ever, if you've been in cybersecurity, you've probably encountered one or ran one. I have never seen a 0% click rate on any phishing campaign, ever. Like, and I don't think you will ever get one. If you run across the company, you will never get a 0%. And so like, that's a thing of like, I think a lot of CISOs will look at click rates and kind of that percentage as an ROI to their security, kind of like justifying their position and seeing improvement of click rate going down. But in the end, you'll never get to 100%. And I don't think anyone ever will. People are going to click on stuff. And that's what, he says here is that assume the click will happen, because it probably will, whether it's part of your phishing campaign or an adversary. And so what do you do when the click happens? He said here, ensure that it leads to a dead end. And I think that's kind of the whole point, right? Like making sure that the blast radius is contained and having those controls in place that when the eventual click happens, if you have passwordless authentication and a site is asking for username and password, that might pause the person to think and say, oh, I've never entered in my username and password. I don't even know what my password is. I haven't entered it in 2 years. Or if they enter in the password, require MFA or a compliant device, or have to be on a certain network, so on and so forth. So even if the attacker had the username, like if you had my Microsoft username and password, I'm not going to be as so bold as some folks in the past and just write it up on the whiteboard.
Daniel Stefaniak, I was literally just thinking about him. Love Daniel Stefaniak is an amazing former Microsoft employee and famously would walk into customer meetings and write his password on the whiteboard
Mhm.
because he was so confident in the multiple layers of authentication that were required and an authentication context that were required above and beyond just username and password, that to him, his point of contention was that's not enough information to be able to successfully sign into anything.
Yeah. And
It was
it
pretty
really
bold, but
isn't. It
it was
is bold.
effective.
I'm not gonna just like sprout my password here because one, I don't know it off the top of my head. I have to actually look it up. But his point is correct, right? Like, because Microsoft requires compliant devices, they require multi-factor, not only multi-factor but phish-resistant multi-factor authentication. So I'd have to physically put in either my FIDO2 USB key, or I'd have to scan it with my passkey. So yeah, I do think that if you do it correctly, you probably can get away from phishing simulations. I actually don't remember the last time I got a phishing simulation email at Microsoft. I mean, it's been a while, maybe like 6 months, maybe a year ago or something like that. But yeah, oh, and that's the other point too. Like, we can argue whether or not they're required, and maybe you have a compliance framework that says you must have some sort of phishing program in place. But if you do, I would say don't really go out and spend a ton of money on it. Like, get something in place to be compliant. If you're a Microsoft customer, as part of E5, you do get attack simulations as part of that. And since we're mentioning that, Adam, just quick, our usual disclaimer, we didn't get into it, but
Yeah, since it came up, Andy and I both work for Microsoft in our field security sales. We do this show outside of work on our own time and we self fund the show. The opinions you've heard expressed to this point and moving forward are those of Adam Brewer and Andy Jaw and do not necessarily reflect those of Microsoft Corporation.
all right. Yeah. And so, like, if you are a Microsoft employee and you have E5, that's going to include at no additional cost, Attack Simulator, which is our built-in phishing program, which uses M365, metrics and tracking, and it uses the same plugin that you would use to report a real phishing email, and it all goes to the same place for admins to kind of look at. And so, I'd say if you had to have one, or you want to just play around with one, and there's even training built in, like you can assign training to little quick things, or upload your own training with a URL. So there's things that are included that you don't need to necessarily go out and pay for a whole nother thing. But I kind of agree with him. Like, if I don't have a compliance framework to do it, like, I don't think this is something that makes sense today. Like you said, with Gen AI, people can just mimic the English language pretty easily, or any language really, and get very close to being able to recognize that this is a non-native speaker, or whatever, however we like taught our users to recognize different, kind of clues.
When I first saw this, and we have talked about this on the show many times, I think one of our very first episodes was on the subject of running phishing campaigns against your users and the efficacy of them. And we have been on the bandwagon forever on this show talking about how you should have defense in depth, you should have multi-layered authentication processes, to where having a factor of just, I know your username and password, should be wholly insufficient to really take any action. And I understand, like, phishing can be deeper than that. It could be, I'm stealing your access token. It could be convincing you to run a malicious file on your PC. I get it's not just, I'm going to steal your password, right? And those are all those risks. Many of them still exist. Getting someone to run a malicious file on their endpoint is still a risk. Stealing their access token, there's still some risk inherent with that. The point here is, very quickly, it's going to be practically impossible to train someone to really understand why this was suspicious, why you shouldn't have clicked this, why you should have been skeptical, because the giveaways are going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Take, for example, all of this AI slop we're seeing on social media feeds, especially on Instagram. The dead giveaway used to be, go look at the hands. The hands are always wrong. Or go look for text in the background. Well, modern image generation models can now generate text very well. Modern image generation models have no problems rendering accurate hands. That problem has really gone away. And even for someone who really knows what to look for, and like me, like I've really studied like what's an AI generated image, I now run into them where I go, gosh, I'm not sure. And it's going to be the same thing to where you could have your best SOC analyst look at an email and they could go, gosh, I don't know if this is legit or not. So there's no point to training users who have day jobs and other responsibilities to be expert level detectives on an email when they may not be able to tell even at an expert level. So that's where this is really coming from, is you're just not going to get return on investment anymore because it's going to be too difficult and it's going to be too sophisticated. So what you need to get to is, instead of focusing all the effort on preventing the click, it needs to be not having negative outcomes as the result of the click. And so, Andy, you touched on all the identity-based things, but also you can touch on things like having token protection in place, having your endpoints designed so that they don't have standing access into a flat corporate network, and that sensitive data is not routinely stored on corporate devices, and everything is stored in the cloud and is only synchronized locally as needed or ad hoc, to where if I compromise an endpoint, it's not a big deal because there's just nothing there. And it doesn't guarantee I can move laterally because there's no help desk hashes or tokens on there that I can use to move laterally or gain privilege escalation or anything else, because you're doing all the right things on your endpoints. So that's where we need to spend the effort, because the return on investment we used to get with these, where it was obvious what a phishing email looked like, it was poorly written, the graphics didn't line up, there were all of these telltale signs. Those are all, if they haven't already gone away, they will, to where you're just not going to get the return on investment. So why are you spinning your wheels there? Everything has opportunity cost in life. It's like, if you haven't taken economics 101, it's the first thing you learn is opportunity cost. If I spend all my time here, I can't spend my time there. And for cybersecurity professionals, every decision is opportunity cost. So the more effort we pour into this, the less effort we can pour into how do we, instead of having a flat network, have a layered network, have an isolated network, have a microsegmented network? How do we get sensitive data off our endpoints? How do we move to phish resistant MFA? How do we do all of these things that actually set us up to the point where phishing emails are really not much of a threat? And that's the engineering effort we need to be spending time on, not this. And that's the reason why, is because it's just not going to return an investment. It's just not going to be valuable because you're not going to be able to tell. Just anybody listening to the show, if you consider yourself really good at detecting AI images, go look at your Instagram and you'll be stunned at how many AI generated images there are on there that are indistinguishable from real. Like, the only way you kind of know they're AI generated at this point is they have that perfect bokeh with the blurred background, and there tend to not be anybody else in the picture. They're always like the person like by themselves, and it's too perfectly framed and too perfectly shot. That's kind of the giveaway at this point, but there's nothing about it that just screams like this is not real. And it's going to be the same with email.
Yeah, and I think the risk was a lot higher.
It
like
was,
10 years ago, right? Like, people didn't have MFA turned on. People didn't have good email protection, like, sandboxing and all of that. They didn't have good we call this next gen EDR, but it wasn't like that before. It was just like hash based. And so if it was a brand new, file that didn't have a hash related to it, then, the risks are a lot higher, or were a lot higher. So yeah, I thought this was really interesting, a good point of discussion for anyone really at a company, especially if you're looking at budget and time invested into a tool that may not provide you with a lot of protections or give you a lot of ROI.
Absolutely. Let's talk Intune Suite and some
Yeah.
M365 changes.
Yeah, so this was super interesting, and apologies that we didn't get to this like until now, but this was
You haven't missed
after.
anything anyway, though. Nothing's happened yet, so it's still timely. Yep. you haven't missed.
Correct. Yeah. So this actually happened after Ignite. There was a blog article that was posted, and I think I didn't really hear
December.
anything. What's that?
It was in December sometime.
It was in December, and honestly, like, in the field, I didn't hear any rumblings until they actually told us about it. There wasn't like
there
any
was no rumors. This just was boom, surprise.
Yeah. And so let's talk about these changes. So basically, Intune Suite, which we've talked about at length on this show before. We've given you breakdowns of each component within Intune Suite, which we'll mention as some of them here. It's all getting rolled into E and E5 at no additional cost. But there are, as part of it, there were some announcements to the pricing changes, which we won't get into like too much here, but there are also some pricing changes to E3 and E5, I believe, for both.
Yes.
What the technical capabilities are. So let's talk about technical capabilities, and then we'll kind of talk about, like, Adam, I'll ask you some licensing questions towards the end because you're more apt on those. But from a technical standpoint, Intune Remote Help and Intune Analytics, and then Intune Plan 2, which includes Intune Tunnel for MAM, the mobile application management, Intune management for specialty devices like Teams phones, and firmware over-the-air updates. That's all going to be included in EMS E3, which is part of M365. And then some things, on top of that, if you have, you're also going to get Intune Endpoint Privilege Management, Microsoft Cloud PKI, and Intune Enterprise App Management. And so that's like our app catalog where you can update your apps. For government folks, because I've talked about this at length with our federal folks, if you are using GCC, which is the government commercial cloud, that is all going to be the same with G3 and G5. So with G3 is going to be the same as what I just said, and G5 is going to include all the things. If you're on GCC High, that is only going to be endpoint privilege management and advanced analytics. So if you have G3 on GCC High, you're going to get advanced analytics. If you're on GCC High for G5, you're going to get endpoint privilege management. And that's because those are the only two things that are available currently for Intune Suite in GCC High. Some key things: the new capabilities will begin to roll out July 1st. So calendar year 26 this year, Q3, July 1st. And the customers who are going to start getting that will get a 30-day notice in their message center before the update becomes available in their tenant. No action is necessary. So anyone with eligible tenants of at least EMS E3, M365 or M365 E5 will automatically be provisioned with the respective Intune Suite capabilities. And we'll post an article that you can read through. I think some of the questions that I have seen, and maybe Adam, you can spin on this, is really like, what if I have Intune Suite today and I'm under contract for that? Like, how does that affect it if I already purchased it? And then also, if there are pricing changes, does that affect me July 1st as part of that? Like, does all of a sudden my E3 and E5 get more expensive as July 1st comes around and these capabilities are included? How does that work?
So to the first question, for a customer that already owns Intune Suite or a component of it, Intune Suite is still going to continue to be sold because through various licensing mechanisms, customers may not own some or all of it. So the SKUs themselves aren't going away. What that means, if you already own it, is you'll need to operate through the normal mechanisms of your agreement. For example, at your next anniversary, you may reduce your quantities to 0 of Intune Suite because it's now included in your M365 suite you own. If you need it now, it's February 1st as we record this, and Andy mentioned the rollout starts July 1st, but we are not committing that on July 1st, everyone's going to be fully lit up. So if you have a need for this technology between now and then, you can work with your Microsoft account team. They can do discounting to help you get, say, the number of months till maybe October 1st and help you get that at the right price. And then you would have an opportunity, depending on your contract situation, to remove it from your contract after that point, since it would be included. So in general, the answer is there's not going to be any magic wand that gets waved that makes it disappear off your agreement. You'll need to take some sort of intentional action. But Microsoft account teams are well aware and will work with you to find a very, very fair and reasonable agreement. But you're paying for it to have access to it now. And this is not going to start until at minimum July 1st and likely well into that third quarter of calendar year 26. Your second question, this was announced at the same time as price increases coming to the Microsoft 365 E3 and E5 suites. Those price increases are effective July 1st, 2026, but only for when customers sign new agreements. So all customers under existing agreements, that existing pricing will continue to be honored. You have a 3-year, 5-year deal with Microsoft, whatever, The pricing at the time you signed will be honored all the way through the lifetime of that agreement. No changes to that. It's when you sign your next agreement after July 1st, those price increases would potentially come into effect. Keep in mind for E5, this is the first time ever in the history of E5, Microsoft 365 E5, that price has increased. That's a SKU that goes back to July of 2018. I would challenge you to find anything else in your life that has not increased in price since July of 2018. It's going to go up from a list price of $57 per user per month to $60 per user per month. There will also be a price increase on M365 E3. That is currently $36 per user per month. I'm not aware off the top of my head what it's going to. I don't believe it's a full $3, but I'm not sure. So I'm not going to commit to that on the air. I will say that did previously have a price increase. I believe it was like early 2022, like maybe April 1st, 2022. I think there was a price increase then for E3. So it's gone several years, but it is having another one here on July 1, another adjustment. You do not, to be clear, you do not need to take that price increase to get eligible for this technology. As Andy mentioned, if you have EMS E3 or M365 E3, you will get remote help, advanced analytics, and Intune Plan 2 at some point after July 1st. If you have E5, M365 E5, you will also get, in addition to everything I just said, endpoint privilege management, cloud PKI, enterprise app management. That happens regardless of your contract status or whether your contract has been subject to the new price adjustment or not. They are independent. So I want to be really clear on that. You can get all this goodness without taking the price increase. But eventually, this does more than make up for it, by the way. Intune Suite list price was $12 per user per month. So these price increases are either $3 or I think the E3 one might be $2. I'm not sure off the top of my head. Way less than the cost of all the technology that's being included. So this is I think customers come out ahead here. They're getting more technology for less money. Overall, compared to what it would have cost to add this in the past. So that's really positive. So yeah, definitely reach out to your Microsoft account team if you need more info. They've been having a lot of conversations on these and would love to help you unpack this more. Also, go check out our archived episodes. We touched on all of these in depth and would love for you to go back in time with us in the Wayback Machine and listen to us talk about it, because these services have continued to improve over time. There's been a lot of investment from an engineering perspective in them. But in terms of the core capabilities and the concept and North Star of them, that really hasn't changed. So you can certainly get up to speed with us too.
Yeah, as you said that E5 hasn't had a price change since like 2018. That's kind of crazy to me, because this isn't the first like capability that's been rolled into
Security
E5.
Copilot?
Yeah, it's not the first one, right? Yeah, like you said, Security Copilot. I mean, like exposure management was added at no additional cost. Defender threat intelligence is now included as well. So there's a lot of things that have come up. We've rolled in IoT capabilities with Defender IoT into that as well. So there have been a lot of capabilities that have been added over time. If you were like one of the first people to like purchase E5, like you're getting a lot better value for it now than you did when you first purchased it, right? So
yeah. And by the way, if you want a little history nugget before we close, before it was Microsoft 365 E5, it was known as the Secure Productive Enterprise E5 or SPE E5.
I don't even remember that.
Yeah, that was before your time, Andy. That was
Okay.
right when I started. So oh my gosh, Andy, I had the year off. It was July of 2017.
Okay.
That it was rebranded to M365. And I know at least it's in its entire existence has never had a price adjustment until now. So that's actually been almost 9 years, or it will be 9 full years at a minimum. So yeah, I mean, not to justify it. I don't need to carry water for our corporate overlords here, but you're right. There has been a lot of value added. And just to be clear, it's not something that has had many price increases over the years. Quite the opposite. In fact, it's been really stable. And that is a fact.
All right. Well, great show. So we'll link the LinkedIn post from JT so you can read it. And I always like to go to it and look at the comments, because I'm sure I didn't even look at the comments, and I'm sure there's great discussion within there.
Those are phenomenal.
Yeah. And then the official tech community article blog for this Intune Suite edition. So in the show notes, as well as our email if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. It's always having a pleasure for our listeners to watch and listen to us. And so we'll talk to you guys next week. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJBrewer. See you at our next episode.